mall buzzed with holiday cheer, a whirlwind of color, sound, and excitement. Strings of sparkling lights crisscrossed the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the bustling scene. Shoppers rushed from store to store, their arms laden with bags, while carolers near a towering Christmas tree sang a cheerful rendition of Jingle Bells. Children tugged at their parents' hands. Couples snapped selfies by oversized ornaments, and the sweet aroma of roasted chestnuts wafted through the air. Among the crowd, William Carter stepped into the mall, adjusting the collar of his tailored coat. He paused briefly, taking in the festive chaos with a reserved air. William wasn't the type to enjoy such lively scenes. As a renowned architect, his days were spent crafting grand designs and overseeing complex projects, far removed from the everyday hum of ordinary life. Yet, this particular outing was non-negotiable. Every year, William made it a point to personally select a Christmas gift for his mother. It was a tradition he cherished, a rare moment of sentimentality in his otherwise regimented routine. He scanned the bustling mall, his mind already narrowing down options that would suit her taste, something thoughtful, timeless, and unique. Despite the lively atmosphere, William felt the weight of solitude pressing down on him. His work had brought him great success, but it often felt like his accomplishments echoed in an empty room. Shaking off the thought, he headed deeper into the mall, determined to find the perfect gift, and perhaps a small slice of peace in the chaos of the holiday season. William weaved through the crowded mall, his polished shoes tapping softly against the tiled floor. The chaotic energy of last-minute shoppers barely registered as he focused on his task. His mother adored gardening, and he had his sights set on a small boutique on the second floor that specialized in artisan planters and handcrafted pottery. As he approached the escalator, a flash of movement caught his eye. Two children darted out of a nearby toy store, their laughter ringing through the air. William's steps slowed as his gaze followed them. The boys were identical twins, no older than 8, with unruly dark hair and striking green eyes that seemed to sparkle even from a distance. William froze in his tracks. His breath hitched as he stared at them, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. Their features, the sharp curve of their jawlines, the mischievous curls of their smiles, and the dimples that deepened with every grin, were hauntingly familiar. It was as though he were looking at a younger version of himself. The twins giggled as they darted toward a holiday display, oblivious to the man frozen in place behind them. William blinked, half expecting the image to dissolve into a trick of the light or a product of his imagination. But the boys were real, their laughter echoing through the bustling mall. Before he could process the surreal sight, a woman emerged from the same toy store, her arms full of shopping bags. She called out to the boys, her voice warm but firm, "Liam, Oliver, stay close." William's attention shifted to her and his chest tightened. Rebecca Bennett. Her auburn hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and though her face had matured over the years, there was no mistaking her. She had once been part of a key project at his firm, a talented marketing professional who had left abruptly 8 years ago. Rebecca's gaze flickered in his direction as she reached the twins, her smile faltering for a brief moment. Recognition flashed in her eyes, but she quickly masked it, turning her attention back to the boys. "Let's go, we're running late," she said, gently ushering them toward the exit. William stood rooted to the spot, his heart pounding. As Rebecca and the twins disappeared into the crowd, his mind swirled with questions. Who were they? Why did the boys look so much like him? And why had Rebecca reacted the way she did? The festive chaos of the mall faded into the background as a single thought consumed him. This couldn't be a coincidence. William couldn't shake the image of the twins from his mind. Their faces, their laughter, and their uncanny resemblance to himself haunted him long after he had left the mall. He had gone there to find a Christmas gift for his mother, but instead, he had stumbled upon a mystery that he couldn't ignore. That evening, sitting in his sleek, modern apartment overlooking the city, William replayed the encounter in his mind. He remembered Rebecca Bennett vividly. She had been part of a major marketing campaign at his firm nearly a decade ago, a rising star with a sharp mind and a quiet determination. But then she had left, suddenly, with no explanation. At the time, he had barely noticed, too consumed by the chaos of work and the demands of his growing career. Now the timing struck him like a thunderbolt. 8 years ago, the same age as the twins. William leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the pieces of the puzzle were too precise to ignore. If Rebecca's departure and the twins' birth were connected, what did it mean? And why had she kept this a secret? Unable to let it go, he picked up his phone and called his assistant, Lila Hastings, who was known for her resourcefulness and discretion. "Lila, I need your help," William said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in his mind. "Of course, Mr. Carter," Lila replied. "What can I do?" "I need you to look into someone," William said, hesitating for only a moment before continuing. "Her name is Rebecca Bennett. She used to work for us about 8 years ago in the marketing department. I need to know where she is now, what she's been doing, and—" He paused, his throat tightening. "If she has children." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "I'll get started right away," Lila said, her tone professional but laced with curiosity. The next morning, Leela arrived at William's office with a folder in hand. She placed it on his desk and gave him a measured look. "Here's what I found." William opened the folder, scanning the contents quickly. Rebecca now worked as a freelance graphic designer, living in a modest suburban neighborhood with her 2 sons, Liam and Oliver. There were no records of a partner or significant other, and her life seemed remarkably private. But one detail stood out. She left the firm right after that campaign, Lila said. The timing coincides with when the twins were born. William stared at the page, his heart pounding. It was becoming increasingly clear that the boys weren't just a coincidence. But why hadn't she told him? Why had she kept him in the dark all these years? He set the folder down, his jaw tightening. "Thank you, Lila," he said. "That'll be all for now." As Lila left the room, William leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to him. William arranged the meeting with care. He had reached out to Rebecca under the pretense of wanting to reconnect with former employees as part of a retrospective on past projects. It wasn't entirely untrue, but he knew it was a thinly veiled excuse. He needed to see her, to ask her the questions that had been consuming him since their encounter at the mall. They met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, filled with the faint hum of conversation and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. William arrived early, taking a seat by the window where he could see the street outside. When Rebecca walked in, his heart skipped a beat. She looked almost exactly as he remembered, though there was a guardedness in her expression now, a wariness that hadn't been there before. She spotted him immediately and approached with slow, deliberate steps. "William," she greeted, her tone polite but distant. "I have to admit I was surprised to hear from you." "Rebecca," he replied, standing to shake her hand. "Thank you for coming." They sat across from each other, the small table between them feeling like an invisible barrier. "What's this about?" Rebecca asked, her voice steady but tinged with suspicion. William hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I've been reflecting on some of the key projects from my career, and your name came up. I realized I never understood why you left so suddenly." Rebecca's jaw tightened, and she glanced down at her coffee cup. "That was a long time ago, William. I doubt it's relevant now." "Maybe not," he said, leaning forward slightly. "But when I saw you at the mall, and your boys," he trailed off, his voice softening. "Rebecca, they look just like me. I need to know the truth." Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "William, this is none of your business. It is if they're my sons. he said firmly, holding her gaze. Rebecca's hands tightened around her coffee cup, her knuckles turning white. For a moment, she said nothing, her expression a mix of anger and anguish. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. "Yes," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "Liam and Oliver are your sons." The words hit William like a punch to the chest. He sat back, stunned, as a wave of emotions washed over him. Relief, anger, confusion. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Rebecca looked away, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You don't understand, William. Back then you were under so much pressure. Building your career, dealing with investors, managing the firm. I couldn't bring this to you. I didn't want to derail everything you'd worked for. You should have let me decide that," he said, his frustration bubbling to the surface. Rebecca's gaze snapped back to him, sharp and defensive. "And what would you have done? Brought me and the boys into your world of cameras and headlines? Let people tear us apart calling me a gold digger? I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let my children grow up under that kind of scrutiny." William fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent his life in the spotlight, his every move analyzed and criticized. He could see why she had made the choices she had, but it didn't erase the pain of being kept in the dark. I didn't know what else to do," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "So I left. I built a life for them, a quiet, stable life. That's all I wanted." William nodded slowly, his anger giving way to understanding. "I get it," he said softly. "But they're my sons too, Rebecca. I want to be part of their lives." Rebecca studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded, though the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. "If you're serious about this, we'll take it one step at a time. But I need to protect them, William. If you can't respect that, this won't work." "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes." As they left the cafe, William felt a mixture of hope and uncertainty. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time he felt like he was taking a step toward something meaningful, a connection he had been missing his entire life. As William drove back to his apartment after the meeting with Rebecca, his mind drifted to the past, a memory he hadn't revisited in years. It was 8 years ago, during one of the most high-stakes periods of his career. His firm had been on the brink of a major breakthrough, and every day felt like a race against time. The company had organized a retreat for their senior team, a weekend getaway at a lakeside resort meant to ease the tension and foster collaboration. For William, it was more a distraction than a reprieve. But that night, something shifted. He remembered the terrace of the main lodge, overlooking the still waters of the lake. The stars above seemed impossibly bright, a rare sight for someone accustomed to city life. He had stepped out for some air after a long evening of presentations and networking, nursing a glass of scotch. That's when Rebecca had joined him. "You look like you could use a break," she had said, her voice carrying a hint of humor. William had turned to her, surprised. Rebecca had always been professional and composed, a rising star in the marketing department. But that night, there was an ease about her, a warmth that drew him in. "I'm not sure a break is in the cards," he had replied, gesturing to the endless string of tasks waiting for him. She had laughed softly, the sound light and genuine. "If you're not careful, you'll burn out. Even architects need a foundation that holds." The conversation had started light, but as the night wore on and the scotch flowed, their words grew more personal. Rebecca had shared stories about her ambitions, her struggles, and the sacrifices she had made to climb the corporate ladder. William had found himself opening up in a way he rarely did, talking about the pressure of carrying the firm's future on his shoulders. "It's not easy being in the spotlight," he had admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm building everything for everyone else, and there's nothing left for me." Rebecca had looked at him then, her eyes filled with an understanding that had caught him off guard. "Maybe that's why we build," she had said softly. "To find something worth keeping." They sat in comfortable silence, the night stretching on with an intimacy neither had expected. The unspoken tension between them grew heavier, and as they exchanged quiet glances, it felt as though the world had faded away. By the time they finished their drinks, what started as a fleeting connection turned into something neither could deny. He remembered walking her back to her cabin, their laughter quiet but unrestrained. At the door, there had been a moment of hesitation, a brief pause as they looked at each other, the weight of the evening settling over them. And then she had leaned in, and he hadn't pulled away. The rest of the night had been a blur of fleeting touches and whispered confessions, a moment of vulnerability that had felt both reckless and inevitable. The next morning, the weight of reality had hit them both. Rebecca had been quiet, her usual composed demeanor slipping back into place. They hadn't spoken about what had happened, and William, consumed by the demands of the project, had pushed it to the back of his mind. Now, sitting in his car as the memory resurfaced, William felt a pang of guilt. He had been so wrapped up in his own world that he hadn't considered the consequences of that night, or the impact it might have had on Rebecca. The twins, Liam and Oliver, were the result of that fleeting moment, a connection he had never imagined, but now couldn't ignore. He gripped the steering wheel, his resolve hardening. It was time to make things right, not just for himself, but for the family he had unknowingly left behind. William stood at the edge of the park, his heart pounding as he spotted Rebecca and the twins near the playground. Liam and Oliver were racing each other toward the jungle gym, their laughter ringing through the crisp winter air. Rebecca stood nearby, her arms crossed, her watchful gaze following their every move. This was it, his first step toward building a connection with the boys and rebuilding trust with Rebecca. Rebecca noticed him approaching and gave a small nod, her expression neutral but not unkind. "They're excited," she said quietly as he stopped beside her. "But don't overwhelm them, okay?" "I won't," William promised, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. As if sensing his presence, Liam turned around first. His bright green eyes lit up with recognition, and he waved enthusiastically. "Hey, it's you, the man from the mall." Oliver followed, more reserved but equally curious. "Mom said you wanted to see us. Why?" William crouched to their level, smiling warmly. "Because I thought you two seemed pretty amazing," he said. "And I'd like to get to know you better, if that's okay." Liam grinned. "We are amazing," he said confidently, puffing out his chest. Oliver giggled, his initial shyness starting to melt away. "Do you like the jungle gym?" William asked, gesturing toward the colorful structure. "We love it," Liam exclaimed. "I can climb all the way to the top." "Well then," William said, standing and offering a playful smile, "show me what you've got." The next hour passed in a blur of laughter and games. The boys eagerly pulled William into their world, showing off their favorite playground tricks and challenging him to a game of tag. For the first time in years, William found himself running, climbing, and laughing with a kind of freedom he hadn't felt in decades. Rebecca watched from a distance, her arms still crossed, but her expression had softened. She hadn't been sure how the boys would react to William or how he would handle the dynamic, but seeing them together brought a small sense of relief. Whatever reservations she still had, it was clear that William genuinely cared. After a particularly intense round of tag, William and the twins collapsed onto a nearby bench, catching their breath. "You're pretty good for an old guy," Liam teased, grinning mischievously. William chuckled. "Old? I think I held my own pretty well." "Can you come to the park again?" Oliver asked, his voice hopeful. William's heart swelled at the question. "I'd like that," he said sincerely. "If it's okay with your mom." The boys turned to Rebecca, their eyes wide with anticipation. She hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod. "We'll see," she said, her tone cautious but not dismissive. As the afternoon came to an end, the boys waved enthusiastically as William walked back to his car. Rebecca stayed behind, watching him carefully. "You did well," she said softly, her tone a mix of approval and guardedness. "Thank you," William replied, his gaze meeting hers. "I'll keep showing up, Rebecca, whatever it takes." She didn't respond immediately, but there was a flicker of something in her expression, perhaps trust, or at least the beginning of it. As William drove away, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a first step toward the family he had never known he needed. Over the next few weeks, William became a regular presence in Liam and Oliver's lives. Every visit was a new adventure, whether it was building elaborate Lego structures at Rebecca's kitchen table, kicking a soccer ball around in the backyard, or huddling under blankets to watch their favorite movies on chilly afternoons. At first, the twins were cautious. They were used to it just being them and Rebecca, and the idea of someone new entering their world felt strange. But William's patient and genuine effort began to win them over. He learned their quirks, Liam's fearless curiosity and love for animals, Oliver's quiet thoughtfulness and fascination with space. One afternoon, while helping Liam paint a model of a dinosaur, William asked, "What's this one called again?" "It's a velociraptor," Liam said, rolling his eyes as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Right," William said, pretending to be embarrassed. "I knew that. You're way smarter than me when it comes to dinosaurs." "Of course I am," Liam replied with a cheeky grin. "Can we look at the stars tonight?" Oliver chimed in from across the table, holding up a book about constellations. "Absolutely," William said. "If your mom says it's okay, we'll set up a telescope and find every constellation in that book." Rebecca, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, smiled despite herself. She had been wary about letting William into their lives, but seeing the boys so happy, so engaged, made her wonder if she had underestimated him. The moment came on a crisp Saturday afternoon. William had taken the boys to a nearby park where they spent hours building snowmen and having snowball fights. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the three of them sat on a bench, sipping hot chocolate from thermoses Rebecca had packed. "Are you going to come back tomorrow?" Liam asked, his voice hopeful. "Of course," William replied, ruffling his hair. "You're always here now," Oliver added softly, glancing up at him. "Like a dad." William's heart skipped a beat. "Well," he said carefully, his voice thick with emotion, "I'd love to be your dad, if that's what you want." Liam and Oliver exchanged a look, then Liam grinned. "Okay, Dad." William froze for a moment, the word hitting him like a wave. He wrapped an arm around both boys, his voice catching as he said, "You have no idea how much that means to me." From the distance, Rebecca watched the scene unfold, her chest tightening. She wiped away a tear before stepping closer, her footsteps crunching in the snow. Later that evening, after the boys had fallen asleep, William lingered in the living room while Rebecca tidied up. The warmth of the firelight flickered across the walls, and the silence between them was companionable but charged. "They called me Dad today," William said, breaking the silence. Rebecca paused, a small smile playing on her lips. "I had." "Fell, right," he admitted, looking down at his hands. "But there's something else that feels right too." Rebecca turned to him, her expression curious but cautious. "What do you mean?" William took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "Rebecca, I've spent my life building things, structures, companies, a career, but none of it has ever felt as important as this, as them, as you." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "I know I've missed a lot of time," William continued, "but being here, seeing the life you've built and getting to know Liam and Oliver, it's made me realize I don't just want to be part of their lives. I want to be part of yours too." "William," she began, her voice trailing off. "I know it won't be easy," he said quickly, standing and stepping closer to her. "But I want to try. I want to show you that I can be more than just their dad. I can be someone you can count on, someone who loves you." Rebecca looked at him, her defenses wavering. For so long she had focused on protecting her boys and keeping her own heart safe. But now, standing in front of William, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. William smiled gently. "That's okay. I'll wait, as long as it takes." Rebecca searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity. Finally, she nodded, a small but genuine smile breaking through. "Let's take it slow," she said. "As slow as you need," William replied, his heart swelling with gratitude and determination. As the fire crackled softly in the background, they stood there for a moment longer, the weight of the past slowly giving way to the possibilities of the future. A month after William had begun building his bond with Liam and Oliver, he decided it was time to take the next step. He wanted Rebecca and the boys to feel like they were truly part of his life, not just as visitors, but as family. With the holiday season in full swing, William invited Rebecca and the twins to his home for dinner. He wanted them to meet his mother, the woman whose unwavering support had shaped his life, and to share a special moment that he had been planning for weeks. The evening was crisp and cold, with a light snowfall blanketing the city. William had spent the entire day preparing his apartment, ensuring it felt warm and inviting. A large Christmas tree sparkled in the corner, decorated with twinkling lights and ornaments he had carefully chosen with the twins in mind. When Rebecca and the boys arrived, William greeted them with a warm smile. The twins immediately ran to the tree, their eyes lighting up with excitement. "This is amazing!" Liam exclaimed, spinning in circles under the tree. Rebecca smiled, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "You didn't have to go to so much trouble," she said softly. "It's no trouble at all," William replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I wanted this to be special." Soon after, William's mother, Margaret Carter, arrived. She was a kind, elegant woman with a warmth that put everyone at ease. She greeted Rebecca with a genuine smile and knelt to meet the twins, her eyes sparkling. "So, you're the two adventurers I've been hearing so much about," Margaret said, shaking their hands playfully. Liam grinned. "We're pretty awesome." Oliver nodded shyly. "Mom says you're the reason William knows how to be nice." Margaret laughed, a rich, joyful sound that filled the room. "Well, I suppose I did teach him a thing or two." The evening unfolded in a swirl of laughter and conversation. The boys charmed Margaret with their stories, and Rebecca found herself relaxing in the presence of William's kind and supportive mother. William, meanwhile, watched it all unfold with a quiet sense of joy. As dessert was being served, Margaret's famous apple pie, William stood, clearing his throat. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves swirling in his chest. "This past month has been the most meaningful time of my life. Getting to know Liam and Oliver and reconnecting with you, Rebecca, has shown me what truly matters." Rebecca's eyes softened, her hands resting gently on the table. William turned to the boys. "Liam, Oliver, I want you to know how much you mean to me. Being your dad is the greatest gift I could ever ask for." The twins beamed and Liam blurted out, "We think you're pretty great too." Laughter rippled through the room, but William's focus remained on Rebecca. He took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Rebecca," he said, stepping toward her and dropping to one knee. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "You've been my partner in raising these two incredible boys, even when I didn't know it. You've given them a life full of love and joy, and you've let me be a part of it. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to do it alone again. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes as she stared at him, her heart racing. She glanced at Liam and Oliver, who were both nodding vigorously, then back at William. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you." Applause erupted from Margaret and the boys as William slipped the ring onto Rebecca's finger. He stood, pulling her into an embrace, as Liam and Oliver cheered. "Does this mean we get to be a real family now?" Oliver asked, his voice small but hopeful. William looked down at him, his eyes shining. "We've always been a family, but now It's official. Over the next month, William and Rebecca worked together to plan a simple but meaningful ceremony. Each step brought them closer, as they shared laughter over the twins' excitement and reflected on how far they had come. When the day finally arrived, under a canopy of white flowers and twinkling lights, they stood side by side, ready to say, "I do." The ceremony was intimate, attended by close friends and family. Liam and Oliver stood proudly by their sides, dressed in matching suits, acting as the ring bearers. Rebecca looked radiant in a simple but elegant gown, her smile lighting up the room as she said, "I do." William, for the first time in his life, felt completely at peace. As they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers, but William's focus was solely on Rebecca and the boys. The reception was a celebration of love and unity, filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. Margaret, beaming with pride, raised her glass and declared, "To family. The kind we're born into and the kind we choose." That night, as the newly formed family of 4 returned home, the twins immediately dove into the pile of wedding gifts. Rebecca watched them with a smile, then turned to William, resting her head on his shoulder. "We did it," she said softly. "We did," he replied, wrapping an arm around her, "and this is just the beginning." As the fireplace crackled in the background and the twins' laughter echoed through the room, William knew he had finally found what he had been searching for all his life: a family, a home, and a love that would last forever. What would you do if you discovered a family you never knew you had? Could you rebuild the bridges and create something beautiful from the past? Let us know in the comments.